Okay, we're back and we're going to talk about marriage and sadly also divorce. So, all right, here we go. So, marriage. This is a really common event in adulthood. And so I thought I'd cover some of the reasons why people might get married, some of the benefits. It is historically across all cultures and all times, there has been some way of sanctifying a monogamous relationship between two people who usually to ensure the orderly raising of children, to ensure that there is a sense of responsibility, in particular on the part of the male, for the upbringing of his offspring or the offspring that are produced by his wife. It's also orderly in the sense of knowing who is entitled to any wealth that has been accumulated by the parents. So it's a really orderly way of ensuring and protecting children in society. There is a huge economic benefit to a couple to be married even when only one spouse works. There are many economic studies that have shown that couples who are married rarely fall under the poverty level. So even when only one member of the relationship works, it is very uncommon for married couples to fall below the poverty level. The things to ensure staying above the poverty level in the United States is to have a high school diploma, to get married before children are produced, and to have at least one member of the couple working full time. There was a really interesting documentary that occurred about 15 years ago that followed the working poor, and most of the working poor in the documentary were single parents who were having to pay for childcare and other kinds of expenses that the one working poor couple married didn't have to pay for. They had 3 children. The wife stayed home full time. She made every single meal from scratch because that's how she contributed to the value. And that the married couple had their own home. They owned their car. They had a computer for their children. Whereas the other examples in the documentary did not have any of those things. In fact, one was living in their car, one was living in a motel room. It's hard to argue against that. That one benefit of marriage is that you have that economic benefit of the stability of the two partners contributing equally to the economic stability of the couple. Of course, both have to carry their weight and they both have to do their part. There are opportunities for emotional growth that occur in marriage that don't occur in other kinds of relationships. Cohabiting relationships have been studied for 30 years now, and research consistently points to the idea that cohabiting couples tend to not display the emotional growth while in the cohabitation that married couples show. And one hypothesis for why that is that married couples are in a sanctified, committed relationship that everybody in the community recognizes as a sanctified, committed relationship. And so other members of the community are more supportive of that relationship than members of the community are of cohabiting relationships. Also, there's that aspect of it being a legal binding contract, and so it's harder to get out of. And so people are oftentimes in a situation where they must figure out how to work it out. One of the shows that has been popular for a couple of years now has been Married at First Sight, and that's one of the premises behind arranged marriages, is that when we are in a relationship that we've all agreed is a long-term committed relationship, and everybody around us is supporting it, it encourages the members of that relationship to work through things that they might walk away from if it wasn't a committed relationship. So we grow. It's a much more reciprocal bond than we have with our parents, because our parents are always our parents. We may call each other our best friends as parents and children, but the thing is, you're not really friends. You're a generation different in age. There's a respect aspect that needs to be maintained between children and their parents, no matter how old the children get. With married couples, you're peers and you are equals in the relationship. It's a more committed bond than people have with their siblings, because siblings, let's be honest, no matter how tight you are with your sibling, there's times that you can just go ahead and not talk to them for a while. Kind of hard to do that with your married partner. And with lovers or cohabitors, again, we don't have that commitment of, I have made a legal binding relationship with you that is going to take a lot of trouble to break, and so it kind of gives a person the opportunity to grow and develop in a way that you can't otherwise. The association between, so those are all very like pragmatic reasons and benefits of marriage. How about some of the more intangible reasons and benefits of marriage? Happiness. Of course, what is happy? It's hard to say. Here we have people who are married versus unmarried. Married are on the left, unmarried are on the right. And you see that the different bars represent people who have kids under 18 on the left, kids who are 18 or over, and those who don't have any kids. And you'll notice having kids or not is not a very big predictor of happiness. Among the unmarrieds with children under 18, they have a slightly lower level of happiness than the other unmarrieds. But you'll notice that on average, the married people are reporting higher levels of happiness. And this is self-report, this is their interpretation, and they didn't know that it was necessarily being tied to whether they were married or not. That was just a demographic question as far as they were concerned, and they rated their happiness. Here we have by sex. The men are in the dark blue bars and the women are in the light blue or green or whatever color that is. Married are on the left and unmarried are on the right. And you see, regardless of sex, married people report greater happiness. Here in this bar, in this graph, we see married on the left, unmarried on the right, and it's broken down by age of the married people. So 18 to 29, 30 to 49, 50 to 64, and then 65 and over. You'll notice among the unmarrieds, the 65 and over are happier than the others. But on average, at every age bracket, the married people are reporting greater happiness than the unmarried people. How about marital satisfaction? A lot of people go, yeah, but I mean, sure, you're stuck in that committed relationship, but how satisfied are people with that relationship? Historically, we've talked about there being a U-shaped curve of marital happiness, where, there's the honeymoon period where people are very happy, and then they start to go into some of the responsibility stages of marriage where they're raising kids and trying to get ahead in their career, taking on financial burdens like houses and cars and things like that, saving up for their kids to go to college. In this U-shaped curve, they're indicating that on average around 25 years of marriage, we see the bottoming out of marital satisfaction, and then you start to climb out as the kids leave the house, as we start to gain fiscal stability, because now we aren't raising kids and they're taking up a lot of the money. The kids start having kids, and so now we have grandchildren. That should contribute to happiness. Retirement contributes to happiness, and then by 35 years of marriage, we see we're back in the second honeymoon. Okay, obviously this graphic is not completely drawn to scale because we're in the pit at 25, and it takes just as long on the curve to get back to the honeymoon stage only 10 years later. So clearly this is not accurate. I can also tell you I've been married more than 25 years, and if that was the pit of unhappiness at 25, that was not very unhappy, I can tell you that. I think that this pit is drawn a lot deeper than the pit needs to be. It is not necessarily tied to all the things that they're showing here. But the thing is, what I like about this U-shaped curve is that it gives people a little bit of hope that maybe while you're in the burdensome obligation stage of marriage, you may be experiencing less happiness than you had been earlier, and you might be dissatisfied and thinking to yourself, man, maybe if I wasn't married, this would all be easier. But knowing that the obligations are going to relieve themselves ultimately, and that things will get back to where they should be sort of a light at the end of the tunnel message. The opportunity will come back to be back where you had been before. There are some differences in expectations between men and women as far as what marriage is supposed to deliver and what it does deliver. For women, they oftentimes are hoping that marriage is going to bring emotional intimacy. They want to be able to talk about their feelings. They want to be able to express their feelings to their partner. For men, their definition of intimacy is different. With their friends, they think that they are being intimate friends when they help each other, when they do stuff together. Just being together while watching the game. That's friendship. And so for women and men, their definition of emotional intimacy looks a little bit different. It turns out that men's needs for intimacy tend to be naturally met by just having a wife around, right? They have practical help. They have somebody to share experiences with. They're together. So they're like, I feel like we are getting emotional intimacy. Whereas for women, a lot of times they're not happy with the level of intimacy that they get fulfilled through their marriage. And that's why it's really super important for women to maintain their female friendships, which is kind of hard when women are, like over the moon in love. A lot of times they just start forgetting about their friends and putting all their energy into their romantic goals. But it turns out that, a lot of women who have been married a really long time say that Their marital satisfaction is increased when they have, regular contact with a female friend who they can have, talk about their emotions, express their emotions, and things like that. Because just through the marriage alone, those things are probably not necessarily going to be met, especially in the earlier years when women are really expecting a lot out of their male partners. It may be frustrating for the new wife to say, he doesn't want to talk about the things I want to talk about. I'll bet your girlfriends want to talk about it though. So keeping the girlfriends is a good idea for any woman involved in any kind of relationship. It's a good idea. How about some other pragmatic benefits of marriage? Health. Here we have the National Center for Health Statistics 2010 data. This is by marital status, the current health conditions. And so you'll see that in the married column, 63.1% reported themselves being in excellent or very good condition. Another 26% reported themselves being in good condition. And then only 10.8% of married people reported themselves being in fair or poor condition. And then, so that's how you read those bars, and you see that, never marrieds tend to have pretty good health reports also. People who are living with a partner, we're seeing more, you definitely see a jump in the fair or poor condition when you go from married to either never married or living with a partner. And then when we get to divorced or separated, we see there's actually a pretty dramatic drop between excellent or very good condition in the marrieds versus the excellent or very good condition in the divorced or separated. And then widowed, you see we have the highest rate of fair or poor. Things to remember about this graphic though, to be widowed on average means that you probably are older on average than the people who are married or never married or living with a partner. Also, we have to keep in mind that being widowed and being divorced or separated are very stressful events in and of themselves. And so those things might change and stabilize with time also. So we have to keep those things in mind. But we do see that on average, better health is associated with being married than with not being married. So health. It's possible that healthy people may attract mates more easily. And so that marital association might just be a completely, spurious correlation where really, health is the key factor and marriage is actually the side factor. It could be, though, that being married helps encourage people to engage in a healthier, safer lifestyle. Particularly for men, there is a lot of data showing that married men engage in healthier, safer lifestyles than unmarried men. Again, that could be an age factor, that, as men age, they're less likely to do the risky activities that they do when they're younger. But it also could be because they've got a wife at home saying, now, don't be jumping off of that stuff and don't forget to wear your helmet and things like that. So it's possible that, the act of being married actually facilitates a healthier, safer lifestyle. Also, when there is an illness or an injury or something like that, people who are married have a sort of person who can help take care of them. So after a surgery, you're less likely to have to stay in a hospital if you can go home and your spouse can take care of you. So that helps. You recover a lot faster at home than you do in a hospital in general. Like I mentioned before, economics. One of the big things that we know about health is that, being in a better economic position is associated with better health. It could be that poor health leads to poor economics. It could be that poor economics leads to poor health. But any way we cut it, married couples tend to be in better health and in better economic standing. And then finally, just having company, having social support is really good, especially for our psychological health as well as for our physical health. I think a lot of married couples help to ensure that their partner goes in to get their tests that the doctor had asked them to get and things like that. Those kinds of supports are really important for maintaining good health. So, how do we predict which marriages are likely to last? So when we say positive effects, we're saying the things that are positively associated with, so having this characteristic is associated with a successful marriage, a long-lasting marriage, a happy marriage. So being between the ages of 20 and 30 has been associated with successful marriages. Being significantly younger than that is, as we all know stereotypically, that's associated with instability. But being significantly older than 30 is also associated with instability. And one explanation comes out of Erickson. If we are too firm in our identity before we start our search for intimacy, it may make it more difficult to find somebody that we can really mesh with. In fact, we may be reluctant to mesh because we're like, well, I am who I am, and I need to find somebody who fits in with that. And so it can be very destabilizing for a relationship if you're unwilling to change yourself at all in light of this relationship. A positive effect for a successful marriage is having at least one child, and especially a boy. On average, men seem to be less likely to leave a marriage that involves a boy child, but they're less likely to leave a marriage that involves any child. So that's one factor that's been associated with success. If the parents of the couple are still married, that's a really good sign for long-term success, because it's part of, for one thing, we a lot of times think right to role modeling, right? We think, well, we've seen a healthy marriage. Well, I mean, not everybody's married because they've had the healthiest marriage, but what they've seen is the ability to stick together, right? The ability to work it through, things like that. And then also, one of the benefits of having parents who are still married is that the parents who are still married obviously value marriage well enough that they're going to encourage their children to work through those issues that could possibly break up a marriage. So having parents who are still married is sort of like a double-pronged benefit. Having positive communication, being able to, especially in arguments, play fair. Don't treat your partner with disdain by rolling your eyes or giving big exhalations to show how just exhausting they are. Instead, having productive conversations, trying to come up with a way to, compromise in a conversation. Pulling up old jokes that we know they aren't even funny, but maybe in the context, it's sort of like a callback. Having a joke that you can tell in the middle of what could be a disagreement helps to bond you even further and makes you remember that, I have a long-term history with this person, they're on my side. Actually saying the words, I'm on your side and I want these outcomes too, is a really positive communication style. A lot of people think positive communication these days is a lot of psychobabble kind of positive communication, where they say a lot of words that don't mean anything, like, well, I understand that when we talk about this, it really makes you upset and insecure, and I really don't want to be making you feel upset and insecure, and that's not my goal, but we really need to that's not super helpful to a person who's feeling upset and insecure. Much more helpful is to say things like, I know this is a really hard conversation, but the deadline's looming and we're just going to have to do it, so let's make a list, or something proactive where the person who's maybe not as upset and threatened can be the person who doesn't get defensive, which is another negative communication style, getting defensive. So if you're really interested in positive communication strategies, you can look up John Gottman, Gottman. He is excellent at communication styles. Now, if we look at long-lasting marriages and ask people what is important for a successful marriage, we can see a couple of things changing between the 1990 data and the 2007 data. For example, they thought children were much more important in 1990 than they did in 2007. But basically, the number one thing on the list was being faithful to each other. Number two was having a happy sexual relationship, sharing household chores, adequate income, good housing, shared religious beliefs, shared tastes and interests, children, and agreement on politics. I wonder if we tested that today, if that would be even a bigger number now. But the important things are you'll notice at the top, things having to do with bonding together as a couple, right? And being a couple, and being exclusively as a couple. And so those are really positive factors associated with long-term relationships. Some negative factors, things that are associated with failures of relationships, would be things like, believe it or not, premarital cohabitation. Living together before you marry is actually associated with a higher risk of divorce. One of the things I mentioned earlier is poorer communication styles among cohabiting couples, and that might be one factor. It also could be that people who cohabit, on average, are more liberally minded about these kinds of issues, and so maybe they view divorce as an option more readily than people who didn't cohabit. It also could be that people who cohabit are living together during like the fun and exciting part of a relationship, and then when they get married and now they've moved into the responsible part of the relationship, they might think that the act of getting married is what caused the relationship to become less fun, when in fact it was just we're getting older and obligations have piled up. So there are a number of explanations for why premarital cohabitation is negative for marriage. Stepchildren is negatively associated. It's much more difficult to blend families than it is to start from ground zero. And so, I mean, some of these things are things that there's nothing a couple can do about it. It is the circumstance. But being aware that it makes it more hard or more difficult means that that couple needs to be aware of that and really work to make sure that it doesn't have that negative effect that it might typically have. African Americans are more likely to experience divorce than people of any other ethnicity. Here's a little chart that shows us our, this is actually 1995 data. I've been searching trying to find the newer data on it and I haven't seen an update. This is the probability of divorce in a first marriage. And so you'll see that the lowest rate is among non-Hispanic Asian. The mid-range rate is a tie among Hispanics and non-Hispanic whites. And then the highest rate is among African Americans and non-Hispanic Black. And so, and again, a lot of times divorce is higher when the community isn't necessarily supportive of the institution of marriage. And so some of these differences among racial groups might be attributable to the attitudes of the people around the married couple, just as much as it is about the attitudes within the married couple. So, okay, so this brings up divorce. And so here's 144 years of marriage and divorce. I think a lot of people have the mistaken assumption that, divorce used to be absolutely no one ever got divorced. And I think what you can see is, there were low rates of divorce in, early times, but it's not zero in 1870. I mean, people got divorced. There was a spike in divorces following World War II. When people got married really impulsively before somebody shipped out, and then when he returned, they got divorced. And then there was a relatively low rate of divorce through the 50s and 60s, and then you'll see that spike there. It looks like, somewhere around the late 70s, early 80s. Around 1977 was when they introduced no-fault divorce, where you could just file for divorce because you just don't like each other anymore. And so there was like this backlog of people who got divorced in that period of time. And now it's slowly been going back down to the level that we're seeing in 2010, 2015. Now what's really interesting is we see these spikes of marriages. You'll see at the end of World War II, the ones who had impulsively got married before he shipped out, we see that spike of divorce. We also see the pent-up, we wanted to get married this whole time, spike of marriages right after World War II. But we've seen marriage has been on the decline over the past about 30 years. And part of that is because if we were able to overlap this, there's been an incline in the rate of cohabitation. So people have been cohabiting instead of getting married and possibly moving out of the marital ranks as a function of cohabiting and maybe serial cohabiting, sort of living for a long time with one person, ultimately breaking up, living for a long time with somebody else, and so on. And so people aren't pressured for marriage the way that they once were. So here we have first marriages ended annually per 1,000 married couple by date and duration of marriage. So you see these different colored bars refer to the era in which they got married. And then how long they were married is on the x-axis, and then the percent of divorces. And so what you can see is the 5 to 9 year period. It doesn't matter what year you got married. Between 5 and 9 years is the most likely time that you're going to see a divorce. And then after that, it's a pretty steep decline towards less and less likely to get divorced as the marriage goes on. So once people can get past the 5 to 9 years, it looks like it's reasonably clear sailing. After that, not necessarily. Now there was a book that relates to this called The 7-Year Itch that then became a movie that had nothing to do with the book. But what they were talking about is right around 7 years after marriage, people tend to want to start looking around, and maybe this data, the 5 to 9 years of marriage is the highest rate of divorce. There might be something to the 7-year itch. Here we have divorce rate by level of education, and so we have the 1970 to 74 data versus the 95 to 99 data, and so you can kind of see that the least educated people in 1970 were the most likely to get divorced. By moderately educated, didn't matter what era we're talking about. It turns out that education doesn't matter. The highly educated people among those who got married in 95 to 99 are the least likely to get divorced. So it looks like college education really helps to make it less likely that a couple will end up divorcing. Here we have the rate of divorce based on the year of the marriage, and then we have men in the top of the panel, we have women at the bottom of the panel, and then we have white men on the left, white on the left panel, black in the middle panel, and Hispanic on the right panel. A lot of data here. And then we have how much education they have. So it looks like, for example, for Hispanic men, level of education does not matter at all. We're seeing that the divorce rate, it has been going down for Hispanic men. Actually, the divorce rate has been going down for everybody. I think we can all agree to that. And for Hispanic men and Hispanic women, level of education doesn't matter across time. Level of education looks a little bit like it matters for black men and women, and then it kind of matters by 2010 for white men and white women. So it looks like, I thought it was interesting to break it down by race and level of education in this interesting graphic. Just thought that'd be fun to look at. All right, so some facts about divorce. Most women will remarry within 10 years of their first divorce. We see here the breakdown by race, and you see that the least likely to remarry is non-Hispanic white women, and the most likely to remarry would be non-Hispanic black women. Almost all men remarry. I don't even have a graphic for it. About 89% of men will remarry after a divorce, and it's all men. Race doesn't seem to matter. Those who have been married tend to get remarried if they divorce. All right, let's stop here and we'll move on to finish up with other relationships in the next and last for this chapter segment.